thank you so much, ladies, for hosting this and organizing it and doing all the promo and everything and working on Canvas or whatever that was. The graphics I thought were lovely. I suppose what I imagine this evening to be is to be like a bird's eye view of what's going on in Shannon. I do feel, and maybe I'm only speaking for myself, that a generation of us who perhaps were quite young during the big anti-war protests maybe missed a lot of the protests at Shannon, and it kind of felt like it has always been there, and it didn't become a big issue over the last 5 years. It has kind of been apart from a couple, there have been politicians bringing it up, but apart from a few, it hasn't ever really caught big headlines like it did maybe 20 years ago. And so I think it would be great to just have like a refresher course on the whole thing. And so I suppose on that, perhaps John, you could give us a rundown, a kind of quite a refresher course on what's been going on the last 20 years there. Why did it start? How many planes land? And what's actually happening at Shannon Airport?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, and hello everybody that's joined us this evening. Where to begin? Well, it does make sense to begin in 2002. Shannon Airport has been a transatlantic gateway for decades and decades. It was the place where planes that were going across the Atlantic had to stop to refuel. But in 2002, the Irish government took a decision to provide landing and refueling facilities to the US military. And that came on the foot of a UN Security Council resolution that was misused by the US to invade Afghanistan. And then we had, of course, in early 2003, the big 100,000 people marched in the streets of Dublin to oppose Irish support for the US invasion of Iraq. But a couple of weeks after that, the Dáil supported the decision of a government to maintain the arrangements for the US military to continue to use Shannon. And they've been using it ever since. And it's become a long, bloody, protracted, ongoing war in the Middle East with Irish government and Shannon Airport's support. So over those years since 2002, probably about 3 million US troops and their weapons, that's nearly the population of Ireland, have gone through the airport to and from the Middle East. A lot of the flights are classified as civilian. So they're military flights, but they're technically classified as civilian. The numbers were at their height with terms of the number of troops that came on those flights. On Omni Air International would be the best known one. You'd see them with a white and green livery at the airport. They park at gate 42. 2005, about 340,000 troops came through in that year. But it's gone down a bit since then. We're still complicit in the US wars in the Middle East, but the numbers are down quite a bit. I think they were at about 89,000 came through last year. Now, these flights are governed by what's called the Air Navigation Carriage of Munitions of War, Weapons and Dangerous Goods Act. And what it means is that if there are weapons on board these flights, the Minister for Transport has to give an exemption or a permit for them to carry the weapons. So Minister gives exemptions all the time, every day of the week. The Minister for Transport is currently Eamon Ryan of the Green Party, and he's giving the permits. So far this year, there were 299 permits up to the end of October, but he also gives permits for overflights. So some of the flights go over Ireland, 480 permits for overflights of these military contracted planes so far in 2019. Now, as well as these troop carriers, you also have aircraft that are directly operated by the US Air Force or the US Navy or military landing in Shannon. So these are C-130 Hercules jets, turboprops carrying cargo or passengers, Boeing KC-135 Stratocasters, they're called. They're basically used for aerial refueling. They come through as well. You have executive jets being used by the Air Force and Navy coming through as well. And the bizarre thing about these is that successive Irish governments have claimed that none of these military planes are carrying arms. None of them, they say, are carrying munitions or explosives. None of them are involved in military operations, they say, or exercises in coming through the airport at all. Now, I think it was Mick Wallace who pointed out at one stage, who was, when he was TD, member of the Uri Parliament now, he says that, given how many thousands euro it costs to fly these planes over and back across the world, the US military don't fly them empty. There's something on board. And if you look at the US Air Force website, it says clearly that, the only thing they do are military operations. So it's a lie. It has to be a lie to say that they're not involved in military operations or exercises when they're coming through Shannon. But the Minister for Foreign Affairs is giving permits for these flights to come through. And in terms of numbers, I have the 2019 numbers here. There were 475 landings at Shannon, another 734 overflights. The numbers are about the same in 2020, a bit less. But essentially what it means is that if you count the flights, the US military flights or US military contracted flights that are landing at Shannon or are flying over Ireland, it's been at about 6 a day, ongoing. So that's our complicity in US wars. Shannon is effectively a US military hub at this stage.
And where are they going usually?
So yeah, they go to a variety of places. Some of them are traveling to Germany, to places like the Ramstein, which is a huge US airbase that has about 10 or 12,000 people living on it in Germany. Some of them are going, a lot of them are actually going to Kuwait, to what the US military call forward operating bases, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, we've logged flights going to there as well. One of the interesting ones as well is that quite a few of them now go to Djibouti. Djibouti is across the Red Sea from Yemen. It's a significant location in terms of the wars that are being waged in the Middle East, and particularly when you look at what Saudi Arabia have been doing in Yemen, and the fact that the US military have been supplying weapons to and parts to the Saudi government. It's very worrying that we see them going to places like that through Shannon.
Okay, so we are entirely complicit in this, and there's no way the Irish government doesn't know where they're going, or that there's no way they think all of these US troops are off on, I don't know, holidays. So we're fully complicit, and despite that, there still has never been really a kind of a national conversation about, do we want this to continue or not? Aside from war making, there's massive issues around the US military, ethically, and between, rendition and human displacement and the environmental costs. There's no angle whereby I find this justifiable. But I was wondering, Lynn, if you want to just pull out a few of the main issues with the US using Shannon.
Yeah, I think you've touched on them all there. Just the broader issues around the displacement, the refugee crisis that we have, the carbon emissions, and also the wars that the US military have been involved in. And it's interesting when you hear about that, the Yemen link. I was on, I think it was Drive Time. It was probably about a year and a half, 2 years ago, when I was still an MEP, and I mentioned that because Yemen was in the news, and that you were seeing the photographs of starving children, and it was cut from the listen back part because they said you couldn't prove that. So I think there's a big problem in Ireland of sustained coverage of Shannon. And I think that's part of going back to what you were saying. Do you mean that those of us who did march in the big march, since then, like I went looking for articles just in advance of this, and like there's some, but it's kind of more when something is in the news and then it goes off again, where there's no sort of that sustained coverage and having that conversation about, is it appropriate that the US Army, and given, as we said, the geopolitical instability that they create, the human rights violations in terms and the displacement, is it appropriate that Ireland, is it something that Irish citizens want to be involved in? And I don't think Irish citizens have ever actually been asked properly whether they want to be involved.
No, and like when you think about it, even like everyone in Ireland knows rendition flights are creepy and really scary and really dark, but by all accounts, weren't you saying, John, that there's like, you have noticed planes that are suspected to be in rendition flights, and the fact that our government refused to investigate these planes?
Yeah, famously, a Labour Party leader said when he was in opposition that not knowing is not good enough when it comes to the suspected rendition planes that were coming through Shannon and to Hercules C-130s that could well have prisoners shackled on board. When he got into government, not knowing was perfectly fine, it seems. But yeah, I mean, this has been ongoing. I mean, I've talked to people who, I've worked at Shannon Airport for years, and they would refer to some of the Hercs parked way out in the tarmac as the rendition planes. That's what they were sort of colloquially known as, because people knew that these planes were likely to have prisoners on board. It's going on. It's been well documented by organisations like Reprieve over in London, by the Rendition Project, by others. Our own the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, or Human Rights Commission as it was before, investigated this, lots of European Parliament reports as well. And we've actually tracked some planes that were known to be used as rendition planes through Shannon. Most of these planes would be using front companies, they're the likes of Aero Contractors was a big one. We've seen the rendition planes. We've gone, as we have with the military planes themselves, to the Garda station in Shannon, sometimes with information about a suspected plane that was about to land, and asked them to do their jobs, which was to inspect those planes to ensure they weren't in breach of law. And nothing happens. Okay, a couple of reports were put into the public domain of planes that had been searched and they were found to be carrying golfers or something benign like that, but none of the ones that probably had the war criminals or the prisoners shackled in them were ever searched. And it's been an ongoing problem. And
correct me if I'm wrong, but is Ireland not bound by a UN convention on torture, I think, to do its utmost to protect against it? I think I might be wrong on that.
We've ratified the UN Convention Against Torture. We've actually got it in Irish law. So we are absolutely bound to ensure that we're not complicit in torture, which is what we have been with the torture planes coming through Shannon. We know of, we've even had cases where men that had spent years in Guantanamo have come with us to Shannon. They've stood beside the airport. They said they know they were brought from places like Kandahar in Afghanistan to Guantanamo Bay. They know that their plane landed someplace which is somewhere on the west coast of Europe. What they didn't know was whether it was in Portugal or Spain, or if it was in Ireland, or if it was someplace else. And they said it could well have been Shannon. And they've asked the Gardaí, and we've asked politicians as well to say, what have you got to say about that? The fact that somebody who was tortured for years could well have been shackled on a plane that came through Shannon. But again, no answers.